There are many ways to bridge the gap between hopelessness and that of well-being. And the journey that carried me to a valley of despair, then brought me over safely to the other side, was both glorious and tragic throughout its course. And that journey started with a basketball game. I was the point guard for Wofford College Terriers basketball team in 1983. And that year we played Georgia Tech, a team that would later go on and win the ACC, and it was full of players that would play professionally in the NBA. Wofford was NAI at the time, so it was a big deal to play a D1 school. And I had the unpleasant task of guarding Mark Price. Mark Price was the Tech point man, and he was an incredible scorer. And he would later be selected as a four-time NBA All-Star. I had never been more nervous before a game. I think I threw up like 3 times, but I committed to myself that I was going to stop Mark Price. And well, I held the great Mark Price to 6 points. It's not bad. Now, of course, that was 6 points in the second half when he played about 2 minutes. He had 22 in the first half, ended up with 28. And I spent most of the game like looking at his belly button like this as he was going up for a jump shot. Needless to say, I figured out early on in my college career that I was not going to play professionally. And so I had to start looking for, what I was going to do after I got out of Wofford, graduated from Wofford. And it's about that time, Lieutenant Colonel John Arrington, the professor of military science at Wofford, approached me and asked if I wanted to join ROTC. And I said, hey, sir, thank you, but it's not really my bag. And he pressed me, and he says, well, what do you like to do? What are you good at? And I said, I like being a basketball player. I like being a part of a team. And he smiled because he knew he had me hooked. And he said, then why don't you join the greatest and most powerful team in the nation and become an officer in the United States Army? I mean, what do you say to that, right? So, I think a month or so later I joined up, but with the idea that I'd only stay in through my initial obligation and get out and find another means to employment. Well, 29 years later, you see how that worked out, But I passed over many bridges throughout my military career. I crossed over from peace to war 4 times. And 4 times I made that trip back. And with each passage and return trip home, it was more difficult. You see, combat changes a person. And by the time I had my last deployment, I barely recognized my former self. I'd gotten angry and I lashed out at everyone around me, particularly those that I loved most, like my family. And eventually, they got numb to my outbursts. Then they got numb to me. And I got numb to life. And about a year after my last deployment to Afghanistan, I decided that I was going to take a trip over a bridge that had no return. It was September 12th, 2013, and I was sitting at a bar looking at the 2nd Street Bridge that connected Jeffersonville, Indiana, where I was drinking, with Louisville, Kentucky, which is where I lived. I had a magnificent view of the bridge and the Louisville skyline. It was just beautiful. And I'd been drinking beer and bourbon pretty much throughout the afternoon. And I finished my last drink after giving a toast to my fallen comrades, paid the tab, and then got in my car with the intention of driving it into the Ohio River and killing myself. Now, I know there would seem to be more efficient ways to commit suicide. However, I was looking for ambiguity, not efficiency. I would rather be remembered as a reckless drunk than as another sick soldier. There were many things that brought me to this point, but one stands out more than any others. You see, when that 1983 basketball team, when we lost to Tech, all the team members, we walked off the court together after that loss. You see, combat, it's not always the case. And we were conducting an operation in 2007 at the height of the surge in central Baghdad. And one of the company's commanders, one of the people in charge of the mission, came up and said, hey, sir, I need more time to plan for this mission. And I told him, I said, no, we don't have any more time. We're going to have to execute the mission. And he kept after me. He said, I don't have enough intelligence. And I finally said, hey, brother, you got to roll. And roll they did. And while clearing IEDs, improvised explosive devices, off the side of the road, Sergeant Freeman Gardner, a 27-year-old newlywed from Little Rock, Arkansas, was standing by a building pulling security when a roadside bomb went off, killing him instantly. We brought Freeman's body back to the medical treatment facility and prepared him for his return trip home to Little Rock. And the medics had put a wool blanket over his chest to cover where a majority of the trauma occurred from the IED. And as is the custom, all the leaders and gathered around Freeman's body to say goodbye. And we all said prayers, and I bent down to kiss Freeman on the forehead. You know, it looked like he was asleep, like I was kissing him goodnight. And when I looked up, I thought to myself, I caused this. If I'd only given the commander more time. The shame I felt was like a huge boulder on my chest, and I couldn't push it off no matter how much beer and bourbon I drank to give me strength. And Freeman was visiting my dreams every night, and I was thinking of him and my other fallen comrades when I got in my car to drive to a location to depart a world that had become too difficult to bear. But fate had other plans for me. About a quarter-mile down the road, a police officer stopped me and arrested me for DUI. And he put me in jail. And the next morning, whenever I got out of the drunk tank, I called my wife. Now, my wife had long said that I needed to get help, that I had a problem. And she is a veteran like myself, and she's a clinical psychologist and treats soldiers with PTSD. So, you know, what does she know, right? But I called her, and before I could say a word, she said, either you go to therapy now, or you'll never see me or your daughter again. My wife laid the first brick into the foundation of my bridge to wellness that day. You see, if she had not said what she did, I'm convinced my second attempt at suicide would not have failed. And she helped me realize, if nothing else, that I needed, that my family was worth living for. This bridge that started on that day would take years to complete. In some ways, the final touches are still being put on it. And it's a sturdy structure. And it was shored up by traditional therapy and alternative forms and approaches to wellness. I'd always been apprehensive about therapy. First, you know, I didn't think I had a problem. You know, soldiers don't get sick serving their nation. And even if we did, it was part of the gig, you know, when we signed up. You know, we're volunteers, not victims after all. But I finally came to the conclusion of this early on, and that is, warriors have a duty to get well. And sometimes we can't do it by ourselves. I'd been diagnosed with PTSD. But in my sessions with my therapist, it became very obvious and clear that there was something else that was going on with me. And through our discussions, it became clear that the grief that I had for my role in Freeman Gardner's death was a root cause to the challenges that I was experiencing. And so my therapist proposed that we go through a program called prolonged exposure. Now, prolonged exposure is a very difficult process where you retell, in some ways relive, the incidents that caused the traumatic experience. It's one of the most difficult things that I've ever done in my life. And but what I came out of that is that understanding that bad things sometimes happen to good people like Freeman Gardner, and we have to forgive ourselves. I found myself getting better through the therapy, particularly after the prolonged exposure. And I saw the anxiety, the angst, and the anger subside, but there was still something missing. My bridge to wellness was not complete. Brene Brown, one of the most prolific TED Talk speakers, once said that grace means your mistakes now serve a purpose instead of serving shame. And my return to grace and my identification of this purpose would be a return to service, only this time out of uniform. I heard about an organization called Youth Build Louisville that worked with at-risk kids in our city, in some of the most troubled neighborhoods. And I went to the executive director, Lynn Rippey, and asked if I could volunteer. And she said, agreed. But I had to tell her, I said, Lynn, just so you know, I have PTSD. And Lynn looked at me and she says, you know, good. Because all the kids in this program, nearly all of them, have PTSD from the experiences that they've had in their homes and in their neighborhoods. And the following week, Lynn introduced me to this class of about 30 young men and women as the Colonel. And when she did that, a young lady in the back, about 16 years old, came back and she said, "He don't look like no Colonel Sanders to me." You know? And that's how it started. And we would meet every morning, and we'd do exercises, and we would talk, and they would call me Colonel. And it was the first time that I felt good being called Colonel in a very, very long time. You see, service is at the very center of a soldier's soul. And with each encounter I had throughout the city, my volunteerism expanded. And with each time I met someone or was a part of something bigger than myself, that foundation became more and more complete until the foundation was done. And then the final two components of the bridge to my wellness were erected nearly at the same time. I was working at a fundraising organization that raised money for arts programs in Louisville. And I had a great opportunity to get around and see performances and everything. And I always really liked theater. And Kentucky Shakespeare was putting on a performance in Old Louisville Central Park, a place where they have these performances. And I went, and Macbeth was playing. And I was sitting in the seat watching the play when the soliloquy near the end of the play comes, and it goes like this: "Out, out, brief candle. Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and is heard no more. 'Tis a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." I sit back and I thought about those words. And it hit me like a slap in the face. That's exactly how I felt at my lowest point. And it just occurred to me that my emotions and my feelings were timeless. They were universal, and I wasn't alone in my struggle. So I approached Matt Wallace, the producing and artistic director of Kentucky Shakespeare, and asked him if he would sponsor a program that brought veterans in where they could learn acting, ensemble techniques, study Shakespeare, and do plays in order to help veterans with PTSD and transition challenges. And he said, yeah. And Shakespeare with Veterans was born. And with the creation of Shakespeare with Veterans was a reunification with old friends of whom I had never met. And that was the other veterans in the program. You see, there are no strangers among veterans. And one of the things we miss most when we get out of the military is that connection with people with shared experiences like, we have in the military. And, we have veterans of Vietnam all the way up to the current conflicts. And we have gotten so close that we call ourselves the tribe. And our chiefess, Amy Attaway, our spiritual healer, director, and mentor, had never met a veteran until she started this program. And a lot of people say, why Shakespeare? It does seem kind of like not a good fit, crusty combat veterans doing Shakespeare. But I tell folks, there's no one in the English language that connects more deeply and passionately with this warrior's heart and soul than William Shakespeare. And the best way to see of this, and also the healing power of art, is from a monologue from Shakespeare's Henry V that goes like this: "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, and he that sheds his blood with me will be my brother, be he ne'er so vile. This day will gentle his condition." Now our tribe and our band has several sisters as well, and our condition has collectively been gentled. And my bridge to wellness was complete. And this bridge that spanned the gap of my despair and landed me safely on the shore of sanity was built by many hands. My wife, mental health professionals, brothers and sisters in arms, and people who'd never served in the military or never even, met a veteran before. It took a community to save this one veteran. And what's interesting throughout this entire process, not one of those folks thanked me for my service. Instead, they thanked me through their compassion and caring and understanding. And just think if this was the case throughout our country, that this great and magnificent bridge was built to cover the gap and divide of civilian and military relations, and it touched every corner of our country. And what if every American dedicated themselves to get to know veterans and understanding them and learning about their experience. And that one day the American people and veterans will meet in the middle of this great bridge and walk hand in hand to the other side of war and transition home together. If this were the case, it would have a powerful, powerful impact on our country. You see, the thing that veterans want most is to be understood. And through this experience and learning to know and understand one another, when our national leaders, if they call to put boots on the ground in some distant war, these folks who have gained, American people who have gained the empathy and understanding could stand and say, not so quickly. There are souls in those boots. Souls like Freeman Gardner's who have passed on. And souls like mine that can be saved.